My name is Attorney Ahmad Cruz, and I have the privilege and the honor of standing beside Mr. Edrick Faust during this case. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for your sacrifice in taking time away from your families, your jobs, and your very important matters to sit and listen to the evidence the state presents in this case. We intend to get you all home as quickly as possible once you have all the evidence that you need to make a decision and not a moment before. First off, you can see on your screens, I'd like to tell you what happened. You all sat through 5 days of jury service and no one ever explained to you what happened. Then we're going to talk about how this is a crime of opportunity, the evidence that you were here supporting that this is not, let me put it this way, you'll hear evidence supporting that this is a crime of opportunity. Then we'll get into Chris Melton's and Tara Baker's relationship and what the evidence will show there. That is going to be very important in this case to understand what was going on with Miss Baker and Mr. Melton before she passed. Then we're going to talk about then I'd like to talk about with you the initial investigation in this case. This investigation, when it came to Mr. Faust, that isn't the initial investigation, but this investigation, when it came to Mr. Faust, you may decide that this is one of the most thorough investigations in Georgia history. In fact, you will learn that this investigation reached a level of desperation. And at the end of this trial, you are going to have questions that the state is not going to be able to answer. And I believe during the state's opening, they admitted one, which is they cannot present evidence to you, or they cannot answer the question of how Mr. Faust would have gotten into Miss Baker's home. They also can't answer the question of when did Mr. Faust's DNA get in Miss Baker's body. They don't know. They won't be able to answer the question, how would Mr. Faust get away from Miss Baker's home unseen at the time of the morning that they said he committed this crime? The evidence will show that in Deer Park, black people simply walking were reported. In fact, on January 19th, 2001, the day Miss Baker passed away, there were 3 individuals reported, two, but one person was reported twice. It was a black male. He had a afro, and he was wearing a bright orange shirt. And the witnesses say, hey, he's just walking normally through the neighborhood. Is he looking around suspicious? No. Is there anything unique about him? No. Actually, when I pulled out my car to get out the driveway, he stopped for me. So the state won't be able to answer if they're reporting individuals walking through the neighborhood. How did Mr. Faust get away unseen in the middle of the morning? And the last question that the state won't be able to answer for you. If Mr. Faust killed Miss Baker, why was the hair that was found on her body, around her body, in her hand, and on the murder weapon of Caucasian origin? You will hear evidence in this case that there is not a shred of evidence that puts Mr. Faust, let alone a black person, in Miss Baker's home. All of the evidence, including the gift Miss Baker left in her hand for police, it's Caucasian hair. Now, the state, these questions have to be answered with evidence, not speculation, not with sensationalized media coverage, and not with unsupported conclusions. These are questions the state must answer for you with evidence and proof. The state may spend a lot of time talking about Mr. Faust's DNA. That is not at issue in this case. DNA is not at issue in this case. But they may spend a lot of time talking about Mr. Faust's DNA being present among, as they presented to you, the multiple DNA profiles that were found and identified. But you may find yourself asking this question at the end of the state's presentation of evidence. How does Mr. Faust's DNA simply being in Ms. Baker's body, along with someone else's DNA profile, establish that he is the person that killed Ms. Baker? And this is why you all are here today. This is why we are here today. We're not here to talk about, and the state is going to present this type of evidence. We are not here to talk about how bad of a person Mr. Faust may have been, how horrible of a boyfriend he may have been. That's not evidence in regards to what they must present to you to prove that Mr. Faust is the individual that committed these acts that they've chosen to charge him with in the indictment. We're here to talk about and find out whether the state's evidence proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Faust committed the crimes that he's charged with. That's it. That is why we are here. And in this trial, the question is not who killed Ms. Baker. That is not the question that anyone is asking you to determine. But again, the question is simply, does the state's evidence that they present to you prove that Mr. Faust, proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Faust is the person responsible for burglarizing Ms. Baker's home? He's charged with burglary in the indictment, sexually assaulting Ms. Baker, and killing Ms. Baker. That's the sole question you have to answer. Not who did it, just does the state's evidence support beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Faust is the person that committed this crime. And that's the key issue in this entire case. And you may get distracted by emotion in this case. You may get distracted by your dislike of Mr. Faust's life choices. But you cannot lose focus, and you cannot forget why we are here today. You are here on a murder, a rape, an aggravated sodomy, and a burglary case. You're going to learn that this is not a case of stranger-on-stranger violence, but rather a case of interpersonal violence. Interpersonal relationship violence. But you cannot be distracted. You can't be distracted. The reason we all chose you is because we thought you were the best jurors to sit on this case. You would not be distracted by emotion, and you would let the law guide you and come to a just decision. The death of a person is a horrible, horrible tragedy, and no one in this courtroom would tell you otherwise. We are not the media. We don't have the opportunity to speculate and draw in viewers. We don't have the opportunity to sensationalize this case of Ms. Baker's life. And that's what we're going to talk about during this trial, is Ms. Baker's life. We're going to show you what Mr. Faust looked like in the year 2000. If you would. This is Mr. Faust in the year 2000. He looks completely different than he looks now. What we put an emphasis on, and what you'll hear in evidence, is this is how Mr. Faust carried himself. He was a very well-dressed, clean-cut individual. He wore jewelry. He drove nice cars. We expect the evidence to We expect the evidence to show that. We're also going to show you a picture of Mr. Faust on February 8th, 2001, which is about 2 or 3 weeks after Ms. Baker's death. This is Mr. Faust about 3 weeks after Ms. Baker's death. Without a haircut, obviously, without his jury in, but this is a picture of Mr. Faust. And the evidence will show this is how Mr. Faust looked after Ms. Baker's death. In 2001, the evidence will show that Mr. Faust was a 25-year-old bar-hopping playboy. You will hear from some of Mr. Faust's ex-girlfriends. Particularly, the state will call Miss Brenda Sweeney. And you will learn in this case that the state, Miss Elizabeth Bigham, she will testify that she's reviewed every single document in this case file. And based on her review of that information, what you will learn is that Mr. Faust did not stay at 350 Cooper Road. Mr. Faust actually stayed in Knollwood Apartments with his girlfriend, Miss Brenda Sweeney, at the time. And this is information that the state has had before today and during the entire pendency of this case. So what happened? That's the question that we're here to figure out. What happened with Ms. Baker? This is Ms. Baker shortly before she passed. This is her law school photo that she took while she was a student at the University of Georgia. And these are Chris Melton's hands after Ms. Baker's death. So Ms. Baker was killed on January 19th, 2001. These photos were taken on January 21st, 2001. This is Mr. Melton's left hand. This photo, these are Mr. Melton's right hand. During this trial, you will learn the nature of Ms. Baker's death. It was an overkill. And what we mean by that, it was terrible. That's the best word I could use. It was terrible. It was a horrible death. Ms. Baker was not only unalived, but the person who did this to Ms. Baker, they beat her, they punched her over and over and over again. And you will hear from the medical examiner the injury she had to her face. Her eyes were swollen and blackened. And then this individual, and we don't know the order, but this individual, this sick individual, then took Ms. Baker's printer cord and wrapped it around Ms. Baker's neck. And he laid on top of Ms. Baker as he pulled the opposite ends of that printer cord, strangling her. That individual, at some point, again, we don't know the order that this took place, but these are the things that took place. This individual at some point walked to Ms. Baker's kitchen, pulled out a knife out of her knife block, and then stabbed Ms. Baker in her neck. And you'll hear that Ms. Baker was stabbed on the right side of her neck. This wasn't enough for this individual. This individual then went into the living room of the home, took Miss Ashley Hall's chenille blanket off of the couch, went and turned on the eye of the stove. They put the blanket on the stove, and when this blanket caught a blaze, what occurred was this person walked back into Miss Baker's room while Miss Baker laid on the floor, still grasping for air, and you will hear that there was shooting in her lungs. He places this blanket on the bed, and then this person takes your laptop. You will hear back in 2001, laptops, cell phones now are like laptops. Back in 2001, laptops were like the cell phones. They would have all your personal information. But this person takes her laptop, he then closes her door, locks it, goes to her bathroom door, and you saw a picture of it in the state's opening, closes the bathroom door, locks it, and takes his time to clean up Miss Baker's house. As the state mentioned in their opening, this person wiped down the door. This person wiped down the stove handles. This person wiped down the back door. This person wiped down the windowsill. And when firefighters, obviously fired a couple of hours later, the fire burst through the roof, you will hear from firefighters that in order to get in this home, they had to kick in the door. And it was deadbolt locked. And the type of doors you'll learn that Miss Baker had, the top lock has a key that you can put in. You have to unlock it to unlock the deadbolt. The bottom lock from the inside, you can just twist it. They have to kick in the front door. It is deadbolt locked. And the back door, there's so much smoke, and the state said this in their opening, there's so much smoke in the house, the firefighter goes to the back door to unlock the door, and the deadbolt is locked on the back door. But what you will hear is that when firefighters found Miss Baker, the individual that did this to her, this was somebody she was comfortable being naked around. The state is not going to present any evidence that clothes were ripped off of her. The state is not going to present any evidence that clothes were found near her. The state's not going to present any evidence that a towel was around her. She was completely nude. No clothing around her body at all. Now, while this individual was strangling Miss Baker, you don't leave your life as innocent or you bring your life as innocent. The evidence we intend to present is that Miss Baker was scratching at this individual's hands while he was trying to strangle him. While he was choking him, Miss Baker was trying to get him off of her. While he was choking him, Miss Baker was grabbing his hair, trying to get him off of her. And the forensics evidence, and we'll get into the forensics, I won't go there now, but the forensics evidence will support that Miss Baker was fighting for her life. Now, I mentioned the back door, that the back door was deadbolt locked. You will hear from a young lady by the name of Miss Kishana Armstrong. She is Miss Baker's niece. Okay? Miss Baker stayed at 160 Fund Drive. Miss Armstrong stayed at 140 Fund Drive. So if you're looking at this map, Miss Baker's home is here where the blue tarp is. Miss Armstrong's home is right there, 2 houses up. And what Miss Armstrong could tell you, and this is the same thing she told law enforcement 20 plus years ago that they ignored, was that, hey, it was 7:45 in the morning. I was going to my car because I had classes. I was getting ready to go to school. And to my surprise, I found it odd that a white guy was running through my backyard with a white T-shirt on and light blue jeans. And Ms. Armstrong is going to tell you, you'll see a photo of it, but Ms. Armstrong is going to tell you, she's going to testify. And what she'll tell you is this person, I can't remember the face because it's been 24 years ago. And you'll learn police never followed up with it. They never showed her a photograph of Chris Melton. And as the state said, Chris Melton was the center of the investigation, right? But they never showed her a photograph of Chris Melton. They never gave her a photo lineup. They said, hey, do you recognize anybody in this photo lineup? So what she'll come in and testify to is, hey, I don't remember the person's face. I can't really remember the person's hair, but I do remember the person having the exact same color hair as Chris Melton. That's what Ms. Armstrong is going to tell you. This is Chris Melton, back in 2001. Ms. Armstrong is going to tell you that she can't remember her hairstyle. She's like, I can't really remember her hairstyle. But I do vividly remember this person's hair color. And what you'll learn is police never even asked her the hair color. When they interview her 20 years ago, they don't ask her about the hair color. Only thing they ask her, how tall is the person, what age group does he look like he's in, and she'll say he looks like he was in his 20s. He had kind of like a medium athletic type of build, and they're aware that Miss Baker is dating Chris Melton. They never show her a photo of Chris Melton. You will learn in this case that law enforcement ignored Miss Armstrong for 25 years. We had to reach out to Miss Armstrong. Once Mr. Faust was arrested, Miss Armstrong was no longer needed. Crime of opportunity. I told you that I would talk about how this crime is a crime of opportunity. During this trial, one of the most important facts that you all will learn is that Miss Baker did indeed have two roommates. One of her roommates is Dr. Valerie Lowe. I believe you heard about her from the state. Then she went by Miss Valerie Lane. She was in school. And also Mrs. Ashley Peavy Hall. At the time of this case, in 2001, she went by Miss Hall. You will learn that each girl had a boyfriend, and we are counting Miss Baker and Mr. Melton. So at any given time, you will learn there could be up to 6 people in the house. And it was very rare, you hear testimony, it was very rare that someone would be at the house alone. However, on January 18, 2001, being great roommates, Dr. Lowe tells Miss Baker, hey, I'm not going to be home. I'm leaving town. I believe she was going somewhere with her boyfriend, so she was going to be out of town. Miss Ashley Peavy Hall tells Miss Baker the exact same thing. And you will hear testimony about Miss Baker's response. But what you will know is that Miss Baker was home alone. What you will also hear is that Miss Baker and Chris Melton spoke the day before her death 5 times. There was a 22-minute call. There was a 5-minute call. There was a 19-minute call. And there was 2 other short calls the day before her death between Miss Baker and Chris Melton. And when law enforcement asked Chris Melton the day of the crime, or the day close to the crime, hey, did you know that Miss Baker was going to be by herself? He said, of course not. He said, of course not. I didn't know that. She wouldn't have told me anything like that. But I do remember me telling her that I wouldn't be able to come down to Athens and spend the night with her. A couple of years go by. And police do this is a part of their investigation tactics. Police ask him again, hey, do you remember if Miss Baker told you that she was going to be home alone by herself the day before she died? Chris Melton then tells law enforcement, I don't remember. So a question that you will have to ask, maybe a question that you will have, is if your future fiancée told you she was going to be by herself and died the next day, is that a fact that you will forget? You will also learn about the nature of their relationship. Dr. Lowe will tell you that Ms. Baker and Mr. Melton, first semester of law school, like this. They're really tight, really close. Mr. Melton will probably testify that if there are 7 days in a week, 5 of those days, him and Ms. Baker would be together. And this is first semester. But you will hear from Dr. Lowe that on New Year's Day of 2001, she came home, and to her surprise, Ms. Baker was home alone. And she talked to Ms. Baker about it, and she asked her about it. Ms. Baker gave her response. I won't get into that. But Dr. Lowe will say there was a change in the relationship from that day up until the time Tara had died. They were not spending as much time together as they used to. But you'll also hear from Miss Baker's best friend. And I say best friend because Chris Melton stated, and that may be his testimony, that Mrs. P.D. Hall was Tara Baker's best friend. She described the relationship to law enforcement as it's pretty much like watching the normal ending of a relationship. But when law enforcement asked Mr. Melton about the relationship, Mr. Melton says, "Oh, everything was fine. She was my borderline fiance. We were about to get married." It wasn't until 5 months later, in June, when law enforcement approached Mr. Melton and said, "Chris, we heard about a fight that you and Tara had the week before her death. Do you know about that?" And for the very first time, he admits that there was trouble in paradise. He says, "Oh, yeah, I know about that. It wasn't a big deal. It was something minor." Now, in the evidence that was provided to us, it wasn't provided to us. You'll learn that we don't have any information on what that fight was about except what Chris Melton said it was about. But it also matches up with Chris Melton's timeline. Chris Melton, when he interviewed with police in 2024, he told law enforcement that he had not seen Tara Baker in 10 days. Okay? That is a very important number. He said that I had not seen Tara Baker in 10 days. That 10 days lines up with their last fight when Chris Melton said, "Oh, 5 months later, I remember this fight." That is an important date to remember because in 2001, when Chris Melton was asked, or as a matter of fact, he wasn't asked, Chris Melton was told that there was DNA evidence in this case in 2001. When they told him it was DNA evidence, Chris Melton volunteered, "Oh, I was just with her 6 days ago. She was at my parents' house, and we had sex 6 days ago." And then he asked, "Did y'all find semen or anything on her like that?" But this is the issue. Law enforcement failed to follow up. They met with Chris Melton's parents, and you would think it's a significant piece of information that you saw a young lady that died at your home the week before she died. The parents never mentioned or confirmed seeing Tara Baker at their home the weekend before. What's verified based on Chris Melton's own words, twice, 2024 and 2001. He saw her 10 days before she died, and they had a fight the week before, which will line up with that 10 days. I promised you that I would talk to you about Chris and Tara's relationship. So this was a relationship where these individuals met at Georgia Military College. Chris was in school as a pre-med major. So pre-med is pretty much when individuals are going to school to become doctors. Miss Baker was in school to become a lawyer. So these individuals were equally yoked when they met. Miss Baker graduated school, and of course, as you know, she entered law school. Mr. Melton dropped out of school. And what happened when Mr. Melton dropped out of school, Miss Baker, she moved to Athens to attend law school. And I'm sure Chris Melton knew he had an amazing woman. He followed. And he didn't follow and move in with Miss Baker. What he did, he followed and moved into a room of someone else that Miss Baker introduced him to. And you will learn that Mr. Melton, to stay close to Tara, was traveling back and forth every day for work from Athens to Covington, Loganville, Gwinnett County, Georgia, every single day while Miss Baker was attending law school. You will hear that towards the end of 2000, as I mentioned, that Miss Baker was distancing herself from Mr. Melton, and she was developing a friendship with another individual, an individual that was in her profession. Her roommates will also tell you that the relationship with Mr. Melton was coming to an end. Now, this is the biggest thing I want you to focus on during the closing. During the evidence, is Chris Melton's behavior after Miss Baker died. This is going to be extremely telling evidence. Ms. Baker dies on January 19th. On January 25th, Mr. Melton goes to Miss P.D. Hall's home to spend the weekend with her and her boyfriend, the family. On the 25th, he calls a girl by the name of Leah Lisa Tucker and invites her on a lunch. Now, let me change it. Goes on a lunch with her. I'll say that. He goes on a lunch. I don't want to misstate anything. We're talking within a week of his borderline fiance dying. Then on this next day, after he set up a lunch with Miss Leah Lisa Tucker, he then calls a woman by the name of Holly Hufford and sets up a lunch with her as well. And Miss P.D. Hall went to this lunch with Chris and Miss Holly Hufford, and she took her boyfriend at the time, Chris Hall. And what she'll tell you, or what the evidence will show, is that during that lunch, Miss P.D. Hall witnessed Mr. Melton flirting with Holly Hufford and even rubbing Miss Holly Hufford's back a week after his girlfriend has just died. And when Miss Ashley P.B. Hall says, all right, me and Chris are leaving, Chris Hall, her boyfriend is Chris Hall, me and Chris are leaving, Mr. Melton explained to them that he was going to stay and hang out with Miss Hufford. And this, again, is within a week of his borderline fiance being brutally murdered. You'll learn on January 27th, after hanging out with Miss Hufford, he called her around 10 o'clock that night and told her if she was out on the town to give him a call. Again, this was a week after his girlfriend has just been brutally murdered. Miss Hufford did not give Mr. Melton a call back. You will also learn that there was a candlelight vigil for the woman that Mr. Melton claimed that he loved. Experienced death, death is like this, you're losing it in instance. There was a candlelight visual held for Miss Baker. And instead of going to that candlelight visual for Miss Baker, for his girlfriend, Mr. Melton told law enforcement, because they had to confront him with this information. This is nothing that he told law enforcement. They confronted him with this information. Mr. Melton told law enforcement that, yeah, I knew about the candlelight visual. I knew about it for about 4 days. But, Lauren, she already had these tickets to this country concert at Turner Field. And, she told me that, she talked me out of going. She said that, Chris, that isn't somewhere you need to be. So instead of going to his girlfriend's, if they were still together, his girlfriend's candlelight visual, he went to a country concert at Turner Field with 2 other couples. It was him and Laura Sherling. It was Laura Sherling's mom and dad, and it was also another guy and gal couple. You, the jurors, will have to decide if Chris Melton's actions after Miss Baker's death were consistent with someone who had suddenly lost their future wife. Next, I'd like to talk to you about law enforcement's failures. And there was a lot of failures in this case. During the trial, you will learn this case is not simply about my client, Mr. Faust. This case is not simply about Mr. Melton, nor is this case simply about Tara Baker. You will learn that this is a case of law enforcement neglect and failure. The evidence will show while this entire community was in dread and fear, law enforcement had enough evidence supporting that the person that killed Miss Baker was right in front of them. But because of the cameras, because of the media attention, and because of the sensationalism, they have Mr. Faust sitting in that chair. The evidence will show that law enforcement knew, this is information they're aware of, law enforcement knew and ignored, as I mentioned, that all the human hair found on her body that did not belong to Miss Baker was of Caucasian origin. You will not hear a shred of evidence that there is an African-American man's hair on Miss, African American's hair on Miss Baker's body. And the reason we showed you the photo of Mr. Faust with the afro is because he had a lot of hair. The evidence will show that law enforcement conducted a DNA test. A DNA test was done. This isn't the first DNA test. A DNA test was conducted on a pubic hair found on Miss Baker's butt. Now, in this case, and the state has already told you this, so I'll follow up with it. In this case, it is undisputed that Miss Baker was sexually assaulted anally. A piece of evidence that law enforcement had was a pubic hair was found on her buttocks. They conducted a mitochondrial DNA test on this hair. And the results of the test was that Mr. Melton could not be excluded as the contributor of the hair. This is information law enforcement had. Law enforcement knew, and this science is now not good science. I do want to be very clear with you. So we're not talking about it because of its scientific purposes. We're talking to you about it because they knew this information and ignored it. There was a hair found on the murder weapon, Miss Baker's murder weapon. So on the cord that was used to strangle her, the cord block was next to Miss Baker's head. I'm sure you'll see photographs of how Miss Baker was found. On this block, they found hairs, human hairs. And one of the hairs, they did a test. It's not good science anymore. I want to make that clear. But at the time in 2001, law enforcement knew that that the scientists had determined that this hair was similar to Chris Melton's hair. Law enforcement ignored it. Law enforcement knew and ignored, and the state has already told you this, there was no evidence of forced entry in Ms. Baker's home. They talked about a window. This is what you will see in the evidence. Can we? Sure. This is the window that the state talked to you about. It's not the best picture, but what you'll see is there's a screen in this window. Because they could not figure out how the person got into the home, they started going around the house and they saw a bent screen. You will hear they saw a bent screen. And because the screen is bent and in the window, they assumed, hey, maybe this person broke in the house by taking the screen down, lifting up the window, lifting up the blinds, climbing into the window, committing this crime. Then, because the doors are locked, they climbed back out the window, let the blinds down, closed the window, then put the screen back in place. And I'll show you a closer picture of what you'll receive in evidence of that screen. That's a closer image of it. And this is one more image of that screen as well. And it's just showing the shape it was in when law enforcement saw this screen window. That's the outside. Now we're going to show you the inside, and this is what you'll see in evidence as well. This is the inside of that window. Chair in front of the window, blinds down, unruffled, but this is how they are alleging Mr. Faust entered into Ms. Baker's home and exited Ms. Baker's home to commit this crime. The law enforcement ignored that there was no signs of forced entry into her home. They ignored that both the front doors were deadbolt locked and the back doors were deadbolt locked. Law enforcement knew and ignored, and this is very important too, because Mr. Faust is charged with a burglary. Dr. Lowe will tell you that in her room, I think she had a change jar with money, she had jewelry in her room, she had electronics in her room, and nothing was touched. Nobody had even rambled in her room. You would also hear from Miss Ashley P.B. Hall, who will tell you may even see images, but you will learn that she had jewelry in her room and she had electronics in her room, and nothing was touched or taken. Nothing was rambled through. Then you will hear about Miss Baker's room. Miss Baker had heirloom jewelry in her room. Heirloom jewelry. She had diamond earrings in her ears. And the only thing that was taken is a personal item, which was her laptop. Police ignored that fact. Law enforcement also ignored, and well, let me say this. So we don't have to prove anything, right? We don't have to present any evidence. The state has to answer the questions when it comes to this case. There are no questions that we have to answer. But something that law enforcement knew and ignored was after Ms. Baker's death, a young lady volunteered. She called in to law enforcement and said, hey, I believe Ms. Baker was out at a Mexican restaurant with me the night before her death. This young lady's name is Jessica Gann. And we're either get it through Ms. Gann or we get it through the law enforcement officer she told it to. But she said, hey, Ms. Baker was out with me the night before she died. She said, we're at a Mexican grill, and, I don't know if it's her, but I believe it was her. Blonde girl, she was talking about law school. I think I heard her. Law enforcement never followed up on this information. Law enforcement never showed Ms. Gann any type of photo of Ms. Baker. Law enforcement never followed up on her to figure out, okay, what more information do you have? They never even confirmed whether or not it was Ms. Baker she saw. They just ignored it. So the state cannot present evidence to you supporting that Ms. Baker, after she left the law library the night before she died, that she did not go out. They don't know. They don't know if Ms. Baker went out. They don't know if Ms. Baker went home. They just don't know. And they don't have any evidence to show one way or the other. Now, they mentioned Chris Melton's alibi. On January 21st, Chris Melton's parents told him, law enforcement, they are after you. They are coming for you, Chris. And that is a quote from Mr. Melton. That his parents told him, Chris, they are coming for you. This was January 19th to 21st, but it was in January 2001. Police wait 4 months to go speak to Mr. Melton's parents after they have already told him 4 months prior that they are coming for you. And mind you, Mr. Melton is staying with his parents now, so he's in the house every single day. They asked the parents, hey, can you tell us what your son was doing 4 months ago on January 19, 2001 at 7 o'clock in the morning? Can you give me a rundown? Surprisingly, and Chris Melton, you'll learn, is their only son, unless they've had children since then, but he was their only son at the time. They say, oh, he was at home. He was here. I remember seeing him. He was walking around. We were mulling around that morning. And then he left our house, and we know exactly where he went. How would they know that information? How would they know where Mr. Melton was going 4 months prior? But this is law enforcement confirming Mr. Melton's alibi, speaking to his parents. 4 months. 4 months after Ms. Baker's death. Law enforcement failed to verify Chris Melton's alibi thoroughly. They just started taking words for it. Oh, he was here? Okay, perfect. He was with you? Okay, perfect. And this is the important thing in this case. The most important time in this case is 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Whatever happens after 9 a.m., it doesn't matter because the murder has taken place. So 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Remember, Ms. Kashana Armstrong at 7:45 said she saw this guy running. 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. is the most important window in this case. Law enforcement also waited 4 months to try and get Mr. Melton's phone records. They waited 4 months after Ms. Baker's death to try to get the phone records for his apartment phone, and that may or may not be important to you all, but to get the records for his apartment phone and his parents' phone call records, resulting in those records being lost forever. So what the state will not be able to present to you in defense of Mr. Melton is that, hey, we have these phone records showing where he was. Those records were lost because law enforcement did not act to get those records. This is the most important thing. So they showed you all a map of Miss Baker's home at Cooper Road, and they showed you where Mr. Faust's home was located. You all remember that? Seeing the box? Okay. This is what this is what you want here. They did a neighborhood canvas. They had a roadblock, all this great stuff. Things you want here. One, they did not talk to the residents on the other side of your park. They could have simply went to 350 Cooper Road and knocked on the door. And they would have had all the information they needed about Mr. Faust because, as they mentioned, 350 Cooper Road was his stepmother's home. So she could have gave them all the information they needed. Two, law enforcement was aware, because you will hear Ms. Bigman say that, hey, I've looked at every document in this case. They were aware that Mr. Faust or his grandmother, if they notated it. Now, I don't know how good their notes were, but those were not two individuals that were notated as individuals that they spoke to around the time of Ms. Baker's death. But this is a fear of theirs, because if they're saying that Mr. Faust stayed a block away, they're basing that on him saying, hey, I stayed at this address for a year. But again, they didn't go and interview those folks. They interviewed people in Deer Park, is what you'll learn, in the neighborhood that Ms. Baker stayed in. Chris Melton, another important fact. After Ms. Baker's death, Chris Melton comes to the police department with his hands covered in plumber's glue. You will hear from law enforcement that there was a shirt that Miss Ashley P.B. Hall, and she's an amazing friend, she did everything she could to try to figure out what was going on with Miss Baker. When Chris Melton came to her house, there was a shirt that she washed, and it was a substance. She called police and said, hey, we believe there's an issue with the shirt. And what law enforcement determined was the substance on the shirt was the exact same substance Chris Melton showed up to the police department with his hands covered in the day of her death. Now, you may hear the audio is grainy. I'm going to try to play it for you all. But you may hear law enforcement. I'm going to play it. So I have to play it a couple of times. But you'll hear law enforcement ask him, and this is a quote, do you want to wash them things? And Chris Melton says, no, this is neat right here. They never searched Chris Melton's apartment. They never searched Chris Melton's car for blood. There's a gentleman you'll hear about by the name of Lindsay Baker. He begged, you'll hear, he begged law enforcement, search his car. Did you search his car? Did you search his car? But what you will learn is, and the state already told you this, when Chris Melton came to Athens, he didn't bring his truck back. He rode in Josh's truck. And law enforcement never searched his car for blood. They didn't care. You won't hear evidence presented by the state that they searched Mr. Melton's car. You won't hear evidence by the state that they searched Mr. Melton's apartment. You won't hear evidence from the state that they searched Mr. Baker's parents' home. In regards to the claim that Mr. Melton made that he saw Miss Baker 6 days before her death, law enforcement never attempted to confirm that. They just took his word for it. Parents didn't confirm it. No one confirmed it. They just simply, well, Chris said it, so it must mean it's true. Let's talk about the forensics. I've already talked to you about the hair. There's no, and I'm going to talk about this twice. When law enforcement met with, and the state told you this, when law enforcement met with Mr. Faust in the interview, what they told Mr. Faust was that your DNA was found in a house in Deer Park. You will hear no evidence that Mr. Faust's DNA was found in any place other than Miss Baker's body. His DNA was not in the house unless you're saying in the house because it's in Miss Baker's body. But there's no DNA of Mr. Faust ever being present in that house. And you will hear he is adamant. I have never been to, I don't know anybody over there. He's going to say that. What law enforcement did not do, matter of fact, before I get into that, there are no handprints belonging to Mr. Faust. There are no fingerprints that the state will present to you belonging to Mr. Faust. There is nothing inside of the house that the state will be able to present to you to connect Mr. Faust with Miss Baker's house. The state wants you to believe that Mr. Faust is smart enough to enter Miss Baker's home, fight with Miss Baker, kill Miss Baker without leaving a trace of evidence behind, sexually assault her, right, because they're charging him with aggravated sodomy based on the allegation that he sexually assaulted Miss Baker anally, but sexually assaulted her without leaving any identifiable DNA behind, then escaped Deer Park just unseen. But he is dumb enough to leave his DNA in her body and commit the charged crimes at the busiest time of the morning. And I don't think the state ever told you what time they are alleging that Mr. Faust committed this crime. Their window is between 8 a.m. and probably around 8:45. And you don't leave your common sense at home. You know what's going on at 8 in the morning and 8:45 outside your neighborhoods. But you have to decide as the jurors, does that make sense? That's the question you have to answer. The DNA. I think this is the most important part of this case that I would like to talk about. We talked about the DNA test conducted on the pubic hair found on Miss Baker's butt. But I would like to talk about the sexual assault kit that the state talked to you about. So the sexual assault kit, as the state explained to you, came back with multiple DNA profiles. Mr. Faust was one of the identifiable profiles. Mr. Melton was one of the identifiable profiles. Mr. Faust's DNA. If I understand the DNA correctly, and I may not, the testimony would be much clearer to me, was found in her vagina and her mouth. Chris Melton will tell you that Ms. Baker engaged in vaginal and oral sex. That is a very important factor in this case. However, as you know from the charges read in the indictment, Mr. Faust is charged with aggravated sodomy for anal sexual assault. Chris Melton told law enforcement when they asked him, do you all engage in anal sex? No, never. She doesn't do anything like that. You know, we just have normal sex. Well, lo and behold, when they get the DNA results back, the only identifiable profile in Miss Baker's anus is Chris Melton's profile. Now, something the state mentioned, they told you in opening that gravity could make the DNA go into that area. Well, what the state says isn't evidence, but what Dr. Falzone says will be evidence. He is the medical examiner. He's the person that did the autopsy. And what he's going to tell you is that it is clear that Ms. Baker was sexually assaulted anally. Based on the injuries, well, let me use the right language. He's going to say it's consistent. That's the proper language. That her injuries to her anus are consistent with sexual assault anally. And the only identifiable DNA profile is Chris Melton's. The state will not present any evidence to you supporting that Mr. Faust ever engaged in anal sex with Miss Baker. It is important that you focus on the evidence that is presented. He is charged with aggravated sodomy, and his DNA is not even identified in her anus. There is no evidence supporting that Mr. Faust had anal sex with Miss Baker anytime or anywhere. The state will not be able to present evidence supporting that Mr. Faust and Miss Baker engaged in that act. Now I would like to talk to you about what I call directing the investigation. You will learn that once law enforcement became aware of Mr. Melton's DNA in Ms. Baker's body, they learned that information that Chris Melton had previously told them was false. Right? You heard the state tell you that DNA typically in certain places only lasts about 5 days. I left out a place. Mr. Melton's DNA was also found in her vagina as well. So his DNA was found in her vagina, anus, Mr. Faust's DNA was found in vagina and mouth. Okay. But you will learn that this DNA of Chris Melton, as the state said, only lasted about 5 days. When law enforcement interviewed Chris Melton, they asked him when was the last time you saw her. He said 10 days, which I said was in line with their fight that he was approached about in June of 2001, the week before her death. Law enforcement says, well, look, and I want to make sure I say this correctly. Instead of interrogating Chris Melton and confronting him and saying, hey, you've been dishonest with us, something's not right here, we've seen the picture of your hands, what law enforcement tells Mr. Melton is they sit down and meet with him. And you're going to hear from the lead detective in this case, Elizabeth Bigham, that she asked Chris, and this is a quote, so was there ever a time in those 10 days, leading up into her death, that y'all just had a quick booty call or met up real fast or anything like that? Chris Melton responded, no. She knew what the DNA evidence was telling her. Ms. Bigham then tells Chris, I need you to be 150% honest with me. And I know that what I'm about to ask you, and I emphasize this language, is not what has been said for 23 years. And that may hinder you from wanting to be honest with me. But you've got to be honest with me. She then tells Chris Melton, look, your DNA would only last in her body 2 to 3 days. And that she needs to, and you'll hear this, she needs to separate Chris Melton's DNA from bad guy's DNA. She says this. I need to be able to explain it. I need to be able to explain it. Jeremy Howell tells Chris Melton, and you'll hear Jeremy Howell testify, that the timeline needs to be correct. Everything needs to make sense. And if we know that this window is here and you're over here, I can't explain this gap. You need to be here. But Chris Melton, and you have to decide if he sticks to his story because he knows he's lied before, continuously denies being with Miss Baker the week of her death. They asked Mr. Melton, well, were you with her the night before? You had a booty call with her at 12 o'clock? He says no. They said, well, how about 2 days before? No. Well, how about 3 days, Mr. Melton? Were you with her 3 days before? No. And eventually they get Mr. Melton for the first time to say in this interview, for 23 years, he changes his story to, you know what? Well, we maybe did it on Sunday. We might have did it on Sunday. And then Elizabeth Bigham tells Chris Melton in this interview, not an interrogation, in an interview, I think we just have to be able to explain it. I think we just have to be able to explain it. And that is our job, is to explain it. So we can then go after the one that we think did this. She laughs. I mean, and the evidence will show Mr. Faust is the individual that she was referring to. My client. When Chris continues to refuse to put himself and Miss Baker together, Miss Bigham, she says, if you're like, you know what, I effing lied about it 23 years ago because I was a scared, terrified kid, and you're right. I had a booty call with her that night. I left at midnight, and I don't know what happened after that. It'll be, thank you, have a nice day. We'll let you know what happens. Like, that's it. We just want to be able to explain it and make it make sense so we can focus on this, So they can focus on this. You'll learn the lead investigator in this case, Elizabeth Bigham, told Chris Melton it was okay if he changed his story or changed his timeline of when he was with Ms. Baker. And if he admitted to lying to police for 23 years so that she could explain away his DNA and put the focus on Mr. Faust and the responsibility for Ms. Baker's murder on Mr. Faust, everything would be okay. She would explain it away. When Mr. Melton would not help Ms. Bigham explain away his DNA, despite the 23 years of conflicting statements from Mr. Melton, and evidence, and you have to decide, but evidence pointing away from Mr. Faust's involvement in this case, the allure of being a hero, the allure of being on TV, being the officer to solve the 23-year-old Tara Baker case became too strong. And we ended up in the courtroom before 12 jurors to decide Mr. Faust's fate. The allure of being on TV became more powerful than following the evidence. And on May 9th, 2024, while Mr. Faust had just finished working, he's at Walmart buying a Simply Lemonade. Police cars swoop in on him and put him in handcuffs and arrest him. Solely because, and this is very important, and follow the state's timeline, solely because his DNA was present in Ms. Baker's body. At the time of Mr. Faust's arrest, which you will learn, it's not, and this is, we told you, this is not a DNA case. We didn't come here to fight with DNA. You will learn Chris Melton's DNA is present, unidentified DNA is present, Mr. Faust's DNA is present, and based on his DNA being identified, he was arrested and charged with burglary based on DNA alone. He was arrested and charged with aggravated sodomy in the anus, even though his DNA isn't present. He was charged with 4 counts of felony murder. He was charged with malice murder, and every other count in this indictment solely based on his DNA being present, along with Chris Melton's DNA. Let's discuss the state's evidence against Mr. Faust, and I thank you for your patience. Do you all need a break? Let's discuss the state's evidence against Mr. Faust. To meet its burden of proof to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Faust killed Ms. Baker, the state is going to rely on, they're going to present evidence of Mr. Faust's DNA being present. Okay? That isn't anything we're fighting with. As I told you, Mr. Faust's DNA profile was not the only DNA profile present, but these are the questions you have to answer, or the state has to answer. Mr. Faust's DNA profile being present does not tell you why this crime occurred or how this crime occurred, and you have to ask for that evidence. It does not tell you when the contact happened, and we don't know. It's been 24 years, 25 years. They've charged him with rape. They have to present the evidence that it was rape. The only thing that we could possibly say that you're here in the testimony in this case is that maybe when she was out at the Mexican restaurant, we don't know because they never followed up on it, they came into contact. We don't know. But that's a question the state has to answer. If you're saying it's rape, explain to us why his DNA is there. If you're saying it's rape, prove it. It does not tell us how the contact between Ms. Baker and Mr. Faust took place.
I'm going to object. If we can approach.
May I
The state's evidence includes, we mentioned the DNA, but what they also intend to introduce, and this is the question you have to ask yourself with anything they introduce, how does this support that Mr. Faust is responsible for death, burglary, rape, Ms. Baker? They intend to bring in a long-term girlfriend of Mr. Faust by the name of Miss Brenda Sweeney. Okay? Now, the thing is, Ms. Sweeney and Mr. Faust were in a long-term relationship. They are not strangers. Okay? The state won't present any evidence of strangers coming in saying Mr. Faust broke in their house and did these terrible things to him. But what Ms. Sweeney will testify to, you may get 3 different things because I believe we've gotten 2. Okay? Police go to Ms. Sweeney's house when Mr. Faust is first arrested. The news is broke. right? She's getting phone calls. You'll see this if they present it. She's getting phone calls from people saying, hey, did you know, I don't know what I'm assuming. Pretty much she ends up saying that, I just got a phone call that Edrick has been arrested. So what happens is law enforcement goes to her house, and the way they find her, based on what the officer says, is police reports. Mr. Faust and Ms. Sweeney had a tumultuous relationship. They fought a lot. Okay, there are police reports of Ms. Sweeney calling the police on Mr. Faust and saying he beat her up, and she gets arrested because there's witnesses saying no, it's the other way around. She was jumping on him. You're going to hear testimony from Ms. Sweeney where she says, hey, Edrick hit me, and I beat him so bad I threw him into a DJ booth one time. Edrick took my car without permission. I went to his grandmother's house, and I beat him so bad he was trying to get me off of him, so he was scratching me, and other people had to come take me off of him. And she's going to give you multiple stories like that. But during this interview, it gets to a point where you'll see that this interview stops. And she says, hey, the worst thing I can say that Mr. Faust has done to me, he's hit me, and when the relationship is over and I'm with somebody else, he'll stop me. Won't leave me alone. Police don't take that as true. When they didn't get this scandalous story from Ms. Sweeney about how terrible of a person Mr. Faust is, and it's terrible to fight with your significant other, what they say is, Brenda, a young lady has been killed, and we want to get justice for this young lady. And we know, he's a terrible guy, and he's done terrible things to you. And just like we want to get justice for this young lady, we also want to get justice for you too. And she says, wait guys, I don't know anything about a cold case. I don't know anything about a girl dying. All right, are you saying Edrick did it? Yes, we believe he did it. And Brenda, you were involved. You were with him at the time. And you'll see her, she misinterprets it. She says, what? How am I involved? And he says, well, Brenda, you were with them, so forth and so on. We've seen police reports with you too. And then she pauses for a second, and she says, Edrick used to force himself on me. And the officer says, oh, tell me more about that. Tell me more about it. And he says, did he punch you? She says, yeah, he punched me. Was he violent? Yeah, he was violent. When he would do this to you, was it vaginally, orally, anally? She said, or you'll hear it, she says, I don't know, for me, vaginally. Right? And they continue talking to Ms. Sweeney. And it gets to a point, and they may present it, they may not present it, but I want you to know this is evidence that may come in this case. It gets to a point that Ms. Sweeney is under so much pressure. And forgive me, I've forgotten the piece. Ms. Sweeney tells law enforcement that she's had multiple strokes, by the way. So she's physically suffering, and she also says it affects her memory. But it gets to a point where they get Ms. Sweeney so worked up, she says, y'all, God just gave me something. She said, I'm very biblical. She said this one time, Edrick went to this house, and there was this girl, and I don't know what he did, but he set the house on fire. And they say, well, did he hurt the girl? She says, I don't know. Says, was anything taken? She says, yeah, he probably took a TV. He probably took it to his stepmother's house. The officer asks, well, how do you know this? Did he tell you? She says, he must have told me. I knew too much. And police at that moment, they don't take it like, oh my goodness, she may not be in the best space to talk, right? They continue talking to her. She tells them all types of fantastical stories. But what ends up occurring is, once I found out about Ms. Sweeney's interview, and you'll hear this too, that's why I say it's two sides. I speak to Ms. Sweeney. She comes to the court in front of the investigators that interviewed her, in front of the prosecutors, in front of Mr. Faust, in front of myself. And she says, I felt like they led me into those answers. She says, the only thing that I can remember from my relationship with Mr. Faust is that there was one time that we had unconsensual sex, and it was not violent. The state will introduce Ms. Sweeney not as evidence supporting that Mr. Faust committed these crimes against Ms. Baker, but to get you emotionally riled up. And that's why we chose you as jurors, because we believe that you will focus on the evidence. They are also going to bring in an individual by the name of Mr. Cedric Jeffries. Mr. Jeffries is serving a 105-month federal sentence. You will learn throughout this case, multiple people, since 2001, I know at least one officer has testified that there's been people from prison called with tips, like, hey, I have this information, can I get a deal or something? Now, what you will learn in this case, Mr. Jeffries is going to testify that I don't have a deal. I don't have a deal. But what he will have to admit is that after he testifies in this case, he doesn't have a deal now, because it'll be terrible for him to have a deal now, because of course we're talking about his deal. What happens after this case, after he testifies and says Mr. Faust told him in 2003 that he committed this crime, I'm going to get into the details for you. Prosecutors, federal prosecutors are going to meet with him. They're going to review the transcript. And if they determine that Mr. Jeffries assisted the state in this case, he is going to receive a benefit. Okay? And you have to consider that information in determining his credibility. But this is what he says. He speaks with, he sees the news. The news breaks of Mr. Faust's arrest. He's in jail. He says this, so you'll hear this. He admitted or we'll play a recording of it. He's sitting there watching the TV. He sees Mr. Faust get arrested. Okay? He doesn't call police. He doesn't say, hey, correctional officer, come here. I know something about a crime. He calls his lawyer. You'll hear that he reaches out to his lawyer. And of course, we don't know what the conversation is with his lawyer, but he ends up meeting with the lead investigator in this case, Miss Elizabeth Bigham. When he meets with Miss Bigham, she says, hey, tell me what you know about this case. He says, well, when I was 14 years old, Mr. Faust came to my house, and he was saying, oh my goodness, I'm about to get into it with police because they know that I killed this girl in Deer Park. Okay? That is what he's going to testify to. So police asked him, why did you wait 20-something years to say that? And Mr. Jeffries says the most important thing, and the reason why he's testifying in his trial. Mr. Jeffries tells him, jail helps me remember things. But you will hear from Mr. Jeffries. That is the state's evidence. Not a single shred of evidence will place Mr. Faust in Miss Baker's home. And the state has told you themselves, they've admitted it. We don't know how he got into the house. The evidence will show that Chris Melton admitted that Miss Baker had a key to his house. You have to decide if it's reasonable that Miss Baker...
I'm going to sustain that.
Yes, ma'am. But the state will rely on Cedric Jeffries, who, when he walks in this courtroom, he is serving a federal sentence right now, 104 months. And this isn't the first case Mr. Jeffries has testified on. Now, he may admit it, he may not admit it. But Mr. Jeffries, at this time, has testified on 2 other cases. He is a witness that gets in on cases and comes and testifies for the state. Something that's important, you're going to hear the interview of Mr. Jeffries, or he may admit it, so we may not get into the interview. But you're going to hear that Mr. Jeffries, one of the things he says is that I've never heard of this case before. Okay, and the state brought it to your attention that Mr. Faust stated that, in his interview, he made statements about Ms. Baker, and we're going to get into those statements. But before I get into those statements, I want to talk to you about sketches you'll see. The state is going to present sketches to you, okay? And what these sketches are of African-American men walking through Deer Park neighborhood, right? Police does a canvass after they find out about Ms. Baker's death. And during this canvass, they're talking to neighbors saying, hey, what did you see? The person that stays directly across the street, hey, Your Honor, may we switch back to the computer? Thank you, Your Honor. So what you'll see, as I mentioned, the blue tarp, and I think you all have to be there, but the house with the blue tarp is Tara Baker's house. The house across the street, I believe that is Mr. Matthew Owens, Mr. Jay Anderson. I may be mistaken on these names, but I think Matthew Owens definitely stays there, Mr. Jay Anderson, and another individual. And when police come and talk to them, what they're going to tell you is that we see a guy in a bright orange shirt. And as you know, in UGA country, you don't wear orange if you're trying to be hidden. But we see a guy in a bright orange shirt. He's either wearing khakis or jeans, and he was walking in front of, down the street in front of Miss Baker's house. And the officer asked, "Can you describe him?" He says, "Yeah, he has like small afro hair, black male, orange shirt, jeans." They said, "Well, how is he walking?" He said, "He's just walking regular, just walking." But he says, "I leave to go away. I walk away from the window for a second." He said it's maybe 5 or 10 seconds he walks away from the window. And he says, "When I come back, that person is gone. I don't see him anymore." He said there's no way they could have made it to the end of the street because he says I could see both sides of the street. He said the person had to cut through the houses. And then you'll hear from Miss Tiffany Riker. And that individual, I think it's Jay Anderson, but the evidence will show the proper name. He doesn't do a sketch, just to be clear. But you will hear from Miss Tiffany Riker, who stays right here, this house here. She's going to say when she's coming out of her house to get in her car, she also sees a black guy. And she gives the same description. Wearing an orange shirt, blue jeans, khakis. He's walking down the street. And that's the gentleman I said who, she backed up. She said, "You stop for me to get out of my car." Now, what you'll learn in this case is on the other side of your park, there's another photo you'll see during this trial, there's a Walmart. It's the Walmart on Lexington Road. So people travel from this neighborhood up here at the top through your park and around here, I think somewhere around here, you can cut through and go to the Walmart on Lexington Road. Okay? And Chris Melton will tell us that African-American foot traffic was coming. Tiffany Riker would tell us that she didn't think anything of it because African-American foot traffic is coming. She thought the guy was walking to Walmart. But when police get this information, despite Ms. Kashona Armstrong saying we saw a gentleman running through my backyard, police say, "Okay, let's do a sketch of this person." So you're going to see a sketch of a guy who may not even know his pictures involved in this case. But they're going to show those sketches. But they're also going to show a sketch from a young lady. She was the wife of a tow truck driver, okay? And the state may, they may change it because I'm about to say it, but the state may try to make this one person, okay? But it's two different people. She says, "Hey, I see a guy. Well, I was out with my husband. We were picking up a car. I saw a guy walking down the street." She says this guy has a heavy set face. He's kind of heavier looking. I can't really tell his body because of the jacket he has on. She says it's a bright jacket, but she says it's long sleeve, which is different from the individual that Ms. Riker and the individuals that stay across the street from Ms. Baker. Different from the individual they saw. They say, "Well, how was he acting?" She says, "Well, he was just walking down the street." She said, "I actually watched him in my mirror the entire time he walked, and he was just walking." So they said, "Well, did he have on a hat?" "No hat, no hood, just a jacket, just walking down the street." The state is going to present those pictures to you as Mr. Faust. They're going to say, "Hey, it's a black guy in the neighborhood. This is Mr. Faust." But again, the only evidence they can present to you is that this gentleman was just walking. One, heavier set in the face. Another, wearing a short sleeve orange shirt. One wearing an orange jacket. All right? But those are the sketches they are going to present to you. One of the sketches, and it's up to you to decide, does not fit the description given at all. And you will hear evidence, you will see those sketches, you will hear the information given by those witnesses about what the person looks like. But the photo that I showed you of Mr. Faust with the hair, they're going to say, "Hey, this is Mr. Faust with his hair, and these are the sketches." Ask questions about the sketches. Look at the sketches. Listen to the information that the state gives you about the sketches. And just to make sure I'm clear, the person that was reported walking in front of Ms. Baker's house, our position would be this is the same person that Ms. Riker saw coming down this way, just for clarity. Lastly, you are going to hear Mr. Faust's interview. You're going to hear what Mr. Faust himself said about this case. You will learn, contrary to what the state has told you, that Mr. Faust was told when he was arrested, we're arresting you for murder and aggravated sodomy. They hadn't asked him anything. That's what you're here for. Murder and aggravated sodomy. Mr. Faust is confused. He talks to him. He chooses to talk to him waive his rights because, of course, he's trying to figure out what the heck is going on. While they're talking to Mr. Faust, they didn't tell him whose murder. You will hear Elizabeth Bigham and Jeremy Howell ask Mr. Faust, did you hear about a cold case from 23 years ago? And that's how they ask him. Did you hear about a cold case from 23 years ago? Mr. Faust tells him, I vaguely remember, and this is a paraphrase, not a quote, but I vaguely remember it. I think I saw something in the paper about it. You will learn Jeremy Howell nor Elizabeth Bigham show Mr. Faust a photo of Miss Baker. Jeremy Howell nor Elizabeth Bigham tell Mr. Faust Miss Baker's name. They don't say, the Tara Baker case. They just say, hey, you heard about the cold case from 23 years ago. They don't even give Mr. Faust the opportunity to explain the DNA because what they tell him, and this is very important stuff, they tell him, why is your DNA found in that house? Mr. Faust say, house? I've never been to a house in Deer Park. My DNA? In the house? Your DNA is in the house. And just as much as I'm here to exonerate, I am here to hunt. But the truth is, as I've told you, the evidence will show there is not a shred of evidence putting Mr. Faust in the house. They didn't have that evidence, but they misled Mr. Faust. And of course, hearing he's charged with murder and aggravated sodomy, he's probably freaking out. And he says, I don't know anything about the house. I don't know that woman. But again, they never gave him an opportunity to confirm who they were talking about. No name, no photo, just the cold case from 23 years ago in Deer Park, and your DNA was found in the house. What you're learning in this case, one person lied to police over and over and over and over and over again. One person simply said, I've never been to a house in Deer Park, whatever you're talking about, I don't know. And the person that's in that chair is Mr. Faust. Now, Miss Baker, as we all know, is a very beautiful woman. They showed us a photo, or the photo that Mr. Faust would have been aware of. It's a glamour shot. The photo that you all saw was not a photo that was shown to Mr. Faust. I do predict that the state, they may change this, I predict that the state is going to attempt to play for you an audio version of Mr. Faust's interview. Because the video version will show that Mr. Faust was given no information other than that he was charged with murder and aggravated sodomy for a cold case that occurred 23 years ago. On the video, you will see no pictures shown to him, as I mentioned. The state's evidence may get you emotionally riled up, but those are not answers. I think this is significant for everybody to know. So in 2001, Mr. Melton is told, as I told you before, that Ms. Baker was sexually assaulted. They had me in there. I may not say the sexual assault piece, but he knew. They told him in 2001, and that's when he came back with, I saw her 6 days before she passed away. When he was meeting with Elizabeth Bigham and Jeremy Howell, they told him, hey, we found another person's DNA in her body. And Mr. Melton's response was telling. Mr. Melton himself said, sounds like she was with someone else.
Your Honor, objection again.
At the end of this case, when you go back home You're sitting around the dinner table, and someone says to you, "Why did you find Mr. Faust not guilty?" You're going to say, "Well, I was fed a wealth of information. All this information came and it boiled down to one thing. The state couldn't prove that Edrick Faust was the person that killed Tara Baker. The state could not prove or present evidence that Mr. Faust was in Miss Baker's home. All of the hair found on and around Miss Baker's body was Caucasian hair. Mr. Faust is an African-American man. And that's why we voted not guilty. The prosecution in a murder case is required to prove their case beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. Not a forced doubt or a speculative doubt, but a reasonable doubt. They have to present a case from you from A to Z. If A is Mr. Faust's DNA and Z is law enforcement's investigation, they never answer the question at G, at H, at I, at J, K. They don't answer the questions about Chris Melton. They don't answer the questions about the hair, even the hair found in her hand. If he did it, why would she have somebody else's hair in her hand? Why would she have non-African American hair in her hand? If Mr. Faust did it, how did he get in and out of the house unseen? Why didn't anybody see a black male running through the neighborhood? If he did it, why would he take so much time cleaning up her apartment? He doesn't know who stays there. There are 3 bedrooms. If he's a stranger, why would he take that time to clean her apartment? This was a crime opportunity. You all swore to uphold the law, to hold the state to its burden. There is evidence here of reasonable doubt that Mr. Faust did not kill Miss Baker. And it is not just sprinkled through this case. Reasonable doubt lives in this case. When you all have heard the evidence in this case, we're going to ask you to render a verdict of not guilty. In this nightmare for Mr. Faust, I am asking you individually and as a body to find Mr. Faust not guilty. Thank you.